Next question is submitted by Jerry, and I think we're going to pass this one around because there is so many different views and opinions on this, and I think it'd be wise to get a little bit of input from everybody. So, what prediction would you make about the automotive industry in the next 20 years? I'll take the first whack at it, and then we'll hand the mic to everybody and let everybody take a cut at this. Matter of fact, I wrote an article about this about 18 months ago. And if I was going to predict one thing in the automotive industry the next 20 years is we don't know what's going to happen. With the advent of battery electric vehicles, with pollution issues, global warming, and all these issues, it's a huge moving target. And I'll play both extremes here. If you would listen to one side, they would tell you tomorrow morning we need to have every internal combustion engine shut off and never turned on again. That's just not practical. Matter of fact, if you do the math on it, it would take you 50 years to do that. And the other side of the equation is, well, we don't need any of that electric crap. We got all the fuel we need. We just need to figure out how to make them more and more efficient. And even that in itself is about as nonsensical as the prior. So I don't know that we know. I don't know if we know where the industry is going. So what does that mean from a manufacturing perspective? You better be pretty flexible, not just from a manufacturing perspective, but from a business perspective. You better be ready to react to what happens in the market, whatever it may be. So Brian, we'll start with you, give you a whack at that, see what you think.
Well, as a guy who has gasoline running through his veins, I believe that the gas-powered vehicles will have a place. I do believe that electric vehicles will increase. There are some challenges with electric vehicles, and that's infrastructure, price, getting the country ready to, range is an issue. But I do believe that the gasoline vehicles will survive. It's incredible the amount of horsepower we can get out of a car compared to 20, 30 years ago. So I don't believe that'll go away, but I think there will be some increases with the electric segment.
Okay, I'm not a proponent of electric vehicles. I'm like Brian. I like the sound of the engine warming up, and I like it when you let it loose and let it roar. However, given the pollution stuff that we have in some of our cities, et cetera, I think that probably the electric vehicle has a really good place in a very, very city-type setting. Short distances, a lot of pollution, that kind of thing. The scary thing to balance that on the other side is how are you going to get rid of the lithium-ion batteries and the other batteries, because we really don't have a good way yet of keeping green and disposing those properly. So I think it's going to be a rather interesting 20 years because I don't think gas is going away, and I think the electric vehicle is going to make its presence more known.
So, Don, you want to take a
I'll take a little bit of a different spin on this. It's, I think we got a generational thing. It's also going to be, what is the customer desire in this? Just because the industry wants to go heavy into battery doesn't mean the customer base is ready to go there. In my career, I've been up and down a few times with, we're going to make V8 engines, we're going to make them go away and only go 4 cylinders, and then lo and behold, we're making V8 engines again heavy, and then we're going to go down to 4 cylinders, and here comes V8 engines again. And that's all driven by the customers. What's customer want on us? And when I say a generational thing, you're looking at a seasoned team here. We'll talk about all our history. Well, yeah, it's all with gas engines, gas vehicles, propulsion system. That's true. We see that, and that's what we're used to. My family, my kids, they're all in their 30s. I got a collective group of daughters and son-in-laws in their 30s. And they're on the fence. We just had this conversation with them a week or so ago, saying, I can see battery, but I can see gas, because they're questioning, how do I take that family vacation in my Traverse with a battery-operated vehicle to Yellowstone Park? I work from home. I would love an electrical vehicle because I don't drive much. So the generations will help decide this, where we land on some of this based on their desires and what they will buy once it's out in the market is how I see it.
Well, I think there's a place for the EV vehicles and whatnot. Bill or one of the other team members mentioned the inner cities. I mean, that's pretty practical to have EV type vehicles in these settings. But Brian mentioned, and it's true. I mean, when you look at in the 50s when Eisenhower set up the interstate system, that was a well thought out, planned activity to handle people going from point A to point B across the U.S. Well, I drove from my home state to here for the meeting, and I saw very little charging stations for EV vehicles and whatnot. So in order to make that practical, you've got to have the range, you've got to have the recovery time on the charges on the vehicles, and then you've got to have the opportunity to do it at least, because let's be frank, American culture and driving especially is instant gratification, right? So you go and you fill your vehicle up with fuel now, and it takes less than 10 minutes. So until we can get to the point where the EV vehicles are charging at a pace that's somewhat like filling up with a fossil fuel vehicle, then I think we've got a ways to go. So I think the gas engines are going to be around for the next years, I will say. Not going to make a prediction on how long, but I think they have their place, but we don't have the infrastructure yet for the EV vehicles. So I think the gas engines will be around for a while longer.
All right, that's good conversation. I think the essence of what you saw there is there's a lot of different opinions on what's going to happen in the automotive industry over the next 20 years. And anybody who claims they know exactly what's going to happen, I would caution you on following their advice and keep an open mind, especially for those of us in manufacturing. We've learned a long time we got to be ready for anything. And we're going to come back to that subject in a couple of questions here, but we'll go with this one. I think we'll give this to Don because I think Don is probably more familiar with this particular question than most of us. When it comes to a new product launch, is APQP, and what that stands for is Advanced Product Quality Planning. It's a process that is prescribed in the automotive industry, and by the way, has been adapted by the defense and aerospace as well. They have sometimes different names for it, but it's a structured process on how you launch a new product. And the question is it necessary? And then why do we not see that framework reference more frequently for new product launches? So Don, you want to take that on?
Okay, as Bill mentioned, is advanced product quality planning important to a new process? And I'd have to say yes, and we should be utilizing it to the best we can within the industry. There's many elements of it. You could have a qualification, PPAP plans, control plans. There's just a lot under the umbrella, and that's why some people shy away from it, because it can be overwhelming how many things fall under the umbrella. But what I will say it does for you, it provides a disciplined approach to ensuring your product quality is spot on and it's delivered to your customer, meeting their requirements. It makes sure you don't miss something. So, you can have various things within the process that you make assumptions on. The runoff of your equipment, for an example. You may say, why have runoff of equipment and do gauge R&Rs and all those things? It's so that you have a stepped approach that when you bring your equipment into the facility and you do your final quality checks, your final PPAP runs, that you can provide your customer a capable system for their products, whatever they're using to build into their components. So yes, it can be overwhelming. There's a lot in that system. The auto industry is fairly large and to be able to handle it. Smaller companies, I would recommend the utilizing of it. You may boil it down to the key elements of it and not get so overwhelmed, but it is definitely a way to have discipline and qualifying your new process.
Thanks, Don. This next question is very pertinent today. I'm going to give this to Brian, but this is an unfair question for any of us. I'm not picking on Brian, but he may have some interesting insights here. The question is this: regarding the current chip shortage, what best practices could have been employed to prevent this chip shortage adventure?
That's a good question. There's a lot of answers to that. The chip shortage, I think, caught a lot of people off guard in some regards because it stopped, in some cases, has affected the production of automobiles. One of the things that somebody could have done is they could have had some safety stock. There are manufacturers that had safety stock that weren't impacted as much. The chips could be made here. I mean, we throw a lot of stuff overseas at times, and the question is, why is everything overseas? So I think when we look at those types of commodities, we need to make sure that, hey, is it necessary for this to be overseas? And if there is a disruption, what's going to happen to the manufacturing sector if this commodity is disrupted?
Next question is going to go to Becky and is, what are your thoughts on supply-based stability? With a global supply chain, what can be done to minimize disruption to the U.S. manufacturers?
Well, I think some of the things that we've gone through with this pandemic really bring forward the instability that we have in the supply chain on a global basis. When you take a look at how we've placed suppliers, where they're located, how the materials shipped to the customer, you got to take a look at, is there redundancy? Do you have an alternative path if the path is interrupted? You really have to do a risk assessment. Should I maybe have two suppliers instead of one supplier and have them in diverse geopolitical areas? Because it's not only a pandemic that can affect you. You can have weather, you can have political upheaval. There's a lot of things that disrupt that supply chain. So I think a lot of what's coming out of this is, number one, we need to do a little bit less offshoring and a little bit more onshoring, and making sure that at least a good portion of our supply base is located within our own boundaries. And then we got to start taking a look in advance. Maybe there was a decision to cut off some volume because we thought the pandemic was going to reduce the market on some commodities. And in the housing industry, for example, we found out that the housing industry soared. And so there's a lot of shortages in lumber and other commodities that go into building a home right now because people took the time to build a home at this point in time, or to move. So we've got to be very careful what we do with the forecasts that we're handed, and we got to make sure that we have the capability of having redundancy in our supply base.
All right, thank you, Becky. This is our last question, and I'm going to try to take this one on, although I would turn to any of you if you'd like to add, because it's a new situation that's growing in the automotive industry, and it's actually starting to get some press here in the last 2 or 3 weeks, so it's pretty relevant. The question is this: the powertrain development and implementation really costs hundreds of millions of dollars for a single automaker. It's true. To develop an engine or a transmission is very expensive. How can major U.S. manufacturers commonize design and manufacturing processes and share these costs over various products and companies? And secondly, most people do not care where their transaxle or engine comes from, and they really don't today. Now, Brian and Becky may take exception because they got gasoline running through their veins, but most customers, they really don't care. Now, where did this question come from? Okay, I mean, why is that being asked today? And here's why, and this is the press that's just starting to circulate on this issue. As battery electric vehicles become a larger and larger percentage of our sales in this country and around the world, quite frankly, we have all of this engine and transmission capacity that's sitting there that very quickly could be, based on what happens, underutilized. And the market share to develop a new gas engine is going to continue to go down. So the cost per unit for development just goes up. So this theory has been just recently, in the last 2 weeks, seriously, has been floated out there. Why don't we just have one big giant engine and transmission manufacturing company in the U.S., in North America? Yeah, on the surface, makes a lot of sense, right? Practical nature, that could be a difficult thing to do. There's a lot of issues around that. But I think it's an issue, a question that we, especially those of us in the manufacturing world, automotive in particular, need to be thinking about. Maybe that's where we're headed. Maybe that's what's going to happen. Likewise, do we really need every automotive manufacturer to build their own battery plant if they want to get into battery electric vehicles? Nah, it's a good question. Maybe we ought to be rethinking about how we do these things.
So what other thoughts, I guess, as we wrap up here, could I give you? And I think each of us here have opinions on, subject matter that we've talked about so far. So if I could leave with one thing, it would be build those relationships with your supply base. Build those relationships with your customers. It's absolutely critical because it will save you a lot of heartache as you're going through launches, as Don mentioned earlier. I think when it comes to an issue to where that you may have a problem with a supplier or with your customer, they're more likely to pick up the phone instead of giving you a complaint, whereas a lot more difficult to deal with than just a phone call to say we may have a problem and we'd like your input on it. So as far as my last comments, I would say is it's all about relationships and either in the supply base or in your customers. So build them and keep them going.
For any of you that had the opportunity to watch our videos today or maybe in the past, and you found the way that we HVMC do business, and you think maybe, hey, I'd like to work with those guys. These guys are pretty cool. They got a new approach to business. You can probably see from our interactions, we're really good friends. We like each other. We get along well. We laugh a lot, but we get the job done. So any of you out there that maybe have some interest, you're maybe tired of playing with the grandkids every day and you maybe want to have a chance to do a little work again, reach out, give us a call, drop us an email, call any of us. We'll talk to you and give you a real straight shot about how we do work, and maybe you would fit in. Thank you for watching our HVMC panel. I hope you found some subject matter in here that was interest to you, and I hope you got to maybe get to know us a little bit better because as you probably know, we are a relationship-focused company, and it's important to know who we are and how we think. So thank you again for watching our videos.